Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall, she was in her backyard doing push-ups and running laps around the neighborhood. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 120 pounds. Nobody took her seriously when she announced her intention to join the Marines. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, looked at her with concern. "Sarah, honey, maybe you should consider other options. The military is tough, especially for someone your size." Even her own parents exchanged worried glances when she brought home the recruitment papers. Her father, a construction worker with calloused hands, gently placed them on her shoulders. "Sweetheart, we support your dreams, but the Marines? That's the toughest branch. Are you sure you've thought this through?" But Sarah had thought it through. Every night for the past 2 years she had researched what it meant to be a Marine. She studied the physical requirements, the mental challenges, and the stories of those who had succeeded and failed. She knew the statistics showed that many recruits, even strong men, didn't make it through boot camp. She also knew that very few women even attempted to join the combat units she was interested in. The recruitment office was intimidating. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a man who looked like he could bend steel with his bare hands, sized her up from behind his desk. His expression was skeptical as he reviewed her application. "Miss Martinez, I have to ask you this because it's my job to be honest. Marine Corps training is not like anything you've experienced. We've had college football players quit in the first week. Are you prepared for that level of intensity?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, I understand the challenges, but I'm not here to waste anyone's time. I'm here because I believe I can do this." Something in her voice must have convinced him because he slid the papers across the desk. "All right then, but I'm going to give you some advice. Start preparing now. Physical fitness is just the beginning. Mental toughness is what separates Marines from everyone else." Over the next 6 months, Sarah transformed her life completely. She woke up at 4 in the morning to run 5 miles before school. She spent her lunch breaks doing pull-ups on the playground equipment. Her bedroom became a makeshift gym with resistance bands, weights, and a pull-up bar installed in the doorway. She studied military history, memorized Marine Corps traditions, and practiced drill movements in her backyard. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. Her younger brother, Jake, often watched her train with admiration. "Sarah's tougher than half the guys on our football team," he told his friends. But not everyone was supportive. Some classmates mocked her dedication, calling her obsessed and unrealistic. "She thinks she's going to be some kind of superhero," she overheard one girl say. Wait until reality hits her. The doubts of others only fueled her determination. Sarah knew that proving herself would require more than just physical strength. She began studying the psychology of resilience, reading books about mental toughness and learning meditation techniques to control her mind under pressure. She understood that the biggest battles would be fought in her head, not just with her body. As her departure date approached, the weight of expectations and doubts pressed down on her. Local news even picked up the story of the small-town girl who thought she could make it as a Marine. The reporter asked her the same question everyone else did. "What makes you think you can succeed where so many others have failed?" Sarah's answer was simple but powerful. "Because I'm not doing this to prove something to anyone else. I'm doing this to prove something to myself." The yellow footprints at Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island were exactly as Sarah had imagined them from countless online videos and stories. Standing there with 49 other recruits, she felt the weight of history and tradition. But she also felt the weight of stares and whispered comments from her fellow recruits. Most were men who towered over her, their muscular frames making her look even smaller than she was. Drill instructor Staff Sergeant Williams was a mountain of a man with a voice that could shatter glass. His first words to the platoon were burned into Sarah's memory forever. "Look around you, recruits. Half of you won't be here in 12 weeks. Some of you are already thinking about quitting, and we haven't even started yet." His eyes seemed to linger on Sarah for an extra moment, and she felt the challenge in that gaze. The first week was designed to break them down completely. Sleep deprivation, constant yelling, and physical demands that pushed everyone to their limits. Sarah watched as 3 recruits quit within the first 72 hours. One was a former college wrestler who simply walked away during a particularly brutal training exercise. The drill instructors made sure everyone knew that quitting was always an option, and they seemed especially interested in reminding Sarah of this fact. "Martinez," Staff Sergeant Williams called out during a particularly challenging obstacle course run. "You sure you're in the right place?" The Navy recruits trains down the road. Might be more your speed. The comment stung, but Sarah used the pain to fuel her performance. She attacked the obstacle course with renewed fury, her small frame allowing her to navigate some obstacles more efficiently than her larger counterparts. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that tested her. The psychological warfare was relentless. During one memorization exercise, she overheard two recruits talking behind her. "I give the little girl another week," one said. "She's trying hard, but this isn't a place for trying hard. This is a place for being hard," the other recruit laughed. "My money says she's gone before the crucible." The crucible was still weeks away, but everyone knew it was the final test that separated Marines from everyone else. 54 hours of intense challenges with minimal food and sleep, designed to push recruits beyond their breaking point. The statistics were sobering. Even strong recruits sometimes failed the crucible, and Sarah knew she would be watched closely during that ultimate test. What her fellow recruits didn't know was that Sarah had spent months preparing for exactly these kinds of psychological attacks. She had studied the experiences of other female Marines, learning how they dealt with doubt and discrimination. She developed mental techniques to turn negative energy into motivation. When someone questioned her abilities, she used it as fuel to perform better. Her breakthrough moment came during a combat training exercise. The drill instructors had set up a scenario where recruits had to work in teams to complete various tasks under pressure. Sarah was paired with 3 male recruits who clearly didn't want her on their team. One of them, a guy named Thompson from Alabama, made his feelings clear. "Great, we got the weakest link on our team." The exercise involved carrying heavy equipment across difficult terrain while under simulated enemy fire. Sarah's teammates tried to take the equipment from her, assuming she couldn't handle it. But Sarah had trained for this exact scenario. She grabbed her share of the gear and took off running, forcing them to keep up with her pace. By the end of the exercise, she had outperformed 2 of her 3 teammates and earned grudging respect from Thompson. That night, as she cleaned her equipment, Sarah reflected on how far she had already come. The girl who had walked onto those yellow footprints was gone, replaced by someone harder and more determined. But she knew the real tests were still ahead. The drill instructors had only begun to turn up the heat, and she could feel their attention focusing on her more intently each day. Week 5 brought the introduction of close-quarters combat training, and Sarah could feel the tension in the air. This was where many people expected her to finally break. The training involved learning to fight with hands, weapons, and whatever else might be available in combat situations. The drill instructors paired recruits against each other in various combat scenarios, and Sarah knew she would be tested against much larger opponents. The first combat instructor was Sergeant First Class Johnson, a man who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had scars that told stories Sarah could only imagine. He looked at the platoon with the expression of someone who had seen real combat and wasn't impressed by anything they might think they could do. "Fighting isn't about being the biggest or strongest," he announced. "It's about being smarter, faster, and more determined than the person trying to hurt you." Sarah's first opponent was Rodriguez, a recruit from California who had played college football and outweighed her by at least 80 pounds. The other recruits gathered around to watch what they assumed would be a quick demonstration of why Sarah didn't belong there. Even Rodriguez looked uncomfortable about the matchup. "Sarge, you sure about this? I don't want to hurt her." Sergeant Johnson's response was sharp and immediate. "Rodriguez, if you think Martinez can't handle herself, then you haven't been paying attention. And Martinez, if you think Rodriguez is going to go easy on you because you're smaller, you're going to get hurt. Both of you need to respect each other enough to fight at full intensity." The sparring match began with Rodriguez clearly holding back, throwing slow punches and giving Sarah room to move. Sarah could see the pity in his eyes, and it made her angry. She had spent months preparing for this moment, studying fighting techniques that would work for someone her size against larger opponents. She waited for her moment, then struck with lightning speed and precision. Using Rodriguez's own momentum against him, Sarah executed a perfect hip throw that sent him crashing to the ground. Before he could react, she had secured a submission hold that left him tapping out in seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. None of the other recruits had expected to see Rodriguez, one of their strongest members, defeated so quickly and decisively. Sergeant Johnson nodded with approval. That, recruits, is what happens when someone assumes size is everything. Martinez used technique, timing, and intelligence to defeat a larger opponent. Rodriguez, you got beat because you underestimated your opponent. In combat, that kind of mistake gets you killed. Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the training facility. Suddenly, the drill instructors and other training staff were paying attention to her in a different way. Instead of looking at her like she was out of place, they began watching her like she was someone who might actually belong there. But with that attention came increased scrutiny and higher expectations. The next few weeks brought a series of increasingly difficult challenges. Sarah faced opponent after opponent, each one bigger and stronger than herself. But she had learned to use her advantages, speed, agility, and most importantly, the fact that everyone underestimated her. She didn't win every fight, but she won enough to prove that she could hold her own against anyone in the platoon. Her success in combat training created a shift in the dynamics among the recruits. Some began to respect her abilities and started asking for advice on technique and strategy. Others became resentful, feeling that she was getting special attention or that the standards were somehow different for her. Thompson, who had initially dismissed her, became one of her strongest supporters. "I was wrong about you, Martinez," he admitted after she helped him improve his grappling technique. But not everyone was ready to accept her success. A group of 5 recruits led by a guy named Harrison from Michigan made it clear that they thought Sarah was somehow cheating or receiving special treatment. Harrison was particularly vocal about his opinions. "There's no way someone her size should be beating guys like Rodriguez," he complained to anyone who would listen. Something's not right about this whole situation. The tension came to a head during a particularly intense training session. Harrison and his group began making increasingly aggressive comments, questioning whether Sarah deserved to be there and suggesting that the instructors were going easy on her. Sarah could feel the situation building toward a confrontation, and she knew that how she handled it would determine her standing with the platoon for the rest of training. The confrontation came during evening chow when Harrison finally decided to voice his complaints publicly. Sarah was eating quietly with Thompson and a few other recruits who had become her allies when Harrison approached their table. His 4 friends flanked him, creating an intimidating presence that drew attention from across the mess hall. "Martinez," Harrison said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking. You don't belong here and everyone knows it. The only reason you're still here is because the instructors are afraid to wash out a girl. They're treating you with kid gloves while the rest of us get the full Marine Corps experience." The mess hall fell silent. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes watching her, waiting to see how she would respond to this public challenge. She set down her fork calmly and looked up at Harrison. Her voice was steady and clear when she spoke. "Harrison, if you have a problem with me, there's a simple solution. Ask Sergeant Johnson to set up a training match. Let's settle this the Marine Corps way." Harrison's friends exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this response. Harrison himself seemed caught off guard, but he had committed himself publicly and couldn't back down without losing face. "Fine," he said. "But when I'm done with you, maybe you'll finally realize this isn't where you belong." Word of the challenge spread through the training facility like wildfire. By the next morning, even the drill instructors had heard about it. Sergeant Johnson called both recruits to his office, his expression serious. "I understand there's been some tension between you two. Normally I'd handle this with extra PT for everyone involved, but in this case, I think a supervised training match might be educational for the entire platoon." The match was scheduled for that afternoon during regular combat training time. Sarah spent the morning preparing mentally, reviewing everything she had learned about fighting larger opponents. She knew this wasn't just about defeating Harrison. It was about proving once and for all that she deserved to be there. The entire platoon would be watching, and her performance would determine how she was treated for the rest of training. Harrison was 6 feet tall and weighed nearly 200 pounds, making him one of the largest recruits in the platoon. He had played high school football and had the build and attitude of someone who had always used his size to intimidate others. As they prepared for the match, he made sure Sarah could hear his predictions. "This is going to be over in 30 seconds, he told his friends. "She got lucky with Rodriguez, but I'm not holding back." The entire platoon formed a circle around the training mat. Sarah could see a mixture of expressions on their faces, some hoping she would succeed, others expecting her to be humiliated. The drill instructors watched with professional interest, but Sarah could tell they were also curious to see how this would play out. Sergeant Johnson gave them the rules. Standard sparring match, submission or knockout to win. Fight continues until one person gives up or is unable to continue. Harrison came at Sarah aggressively from the start, using his reach advantage to throw powerful punches that would have ended the fight immediately if they had connected. But Sarah had learned to use her size as an advantage, staying low and moving constantly to avoid his strikes while looking for openings to counterattack. The other recruits shouted encouragement to both fighters, the tension in the room building with each exchange. The turning point came when Harrison overcommitted on a big swing, leaving himself off balance. Sarah ducked under his arm and swept his leg, sending him crashing to the mat. Before he could recover, she had secured a rear chokehold, applying pressure to the arteries in his neck. Harrison struggled frantically, using his strength advantage to try to break free, but Sarah had positioned herself perfectly and maintained the hold despite his efforts. Within seconds, Harrison was forced to tap out, gasping for air as Sarah released the hold. The silence that followed was even more profound than after her victory over Rodriguez. Harrison, one of the most vocal critics of Sarah's presence in the platoon, had been decisively defeated using technique and skill rather than brute force. Sergeant Johnson stepped forward, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Let me make something clear to all of you. What you just witnessed is exactly what Marine Corps combat training is designed to produce. Martinez didn't win because she's stronger or bigger than Harrison. She won because she's better trained, more disciplined, and more focused. Those are the qualities that make Marines effective in combat, not size or gender." The victory over Harrison marked a turning point in Sarah's training experience, but it also brought new challenges. Word of her performance had spread beyond her platoon, attracting attention from senior training staff and instructors from other units. Some of this attention was positive, with experienced Marines curious to see what the small recruit was capable of. But other attention was more skeptical, with some instructors wondering if her success was somehow artificial or unsustainable. Master Sergeant Coleman, a veteran with 25 years of service and a reputation for being impossible to impress, decided to personally observe Sarah's training. He showed up unannounced during a weapons training session, his presence immediately making all the recruits nervous. Coleman was known for washing out recruits who he felt didn't meet his standards, regardless of how well they had performed for other instructors. The weapons training involved disassembling, cleaning and reassembling M16 rifles under time pressure while blindfolded. It was a test of muscle memory, attention to detail, and ability to perform under stress. Sarah had practiced this exercise hundreds of times, but knowing that Master Sergeant Coleman was watching made her hands shake slightly as she began. "Martinez," Coleman called out as she worked, "I hear you've been making quite an impression around here. Some people think you're something special. I'm here to see if they're right or if they're just being fooled by a few lucky punches." His words were designed to distract her, and Sarah forced herself to focus on the familiar weight and feel of the weapon components in her hands. She completed the exercise in record time, her rifle perfectly assembled and ready for inspection. Coleman examined her work carefully, looking for any flaw that might justify his skepticism. When he found none, his expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a slight nod of approval. "Not bad, Martinez, but let's see how you handle some real pressure." What followed was the most intense individual training session Sarah had ever experienced. Coleman put her through a series of combat scenarios that tested every skill she had learned. She had to navigate obstacle courses while under simulated enemy fire, make tactical decisions under extreme time pressure, and demonstrate proficiency with multiple weapon systems. Each task was harder than anything she had faced in regular training. The final test was a one-on-one combat scenario against Master Sergeant Coleman himself. At first, Sarah thought he was joking. Coleman was not only much larger than her, but he was also a combat veteran with decades of fighting experience. But his expression made it clear that this was no joke. If you're going to be a Marine, Martinez, you need to be able to defend yourself against anyone, including people with more experience than you have. The fight was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Coleman moved with the fluid precision of someone who had learned to fight not in training facilities, but in real combat situations. He didn't rely on brute strength like the recruits she had been fighting. Instead, he used subtle positioning, timing, and experience to control the flow of the fight. For the first few minutes, Sarah found herself constantly on the defensive, barely able to avoid his attacks. But as the fight continued, Sarah began to adapt. She realized that Coleman was testing her ability to learn and adjust during combat, not just her ability to use techniques she already knew. She started to pick up on his patterns, finding small openings that she could exploit. When she finally managed to land a solid hit, Coleman smiled for the first time since arriving. "Better," he said, pressing his attack with renewed intensity. "But not good enough yet." The fight continued for another 10 minutes, with Sarah gradually holding her own against the experienced instructor. She didn't win, but she didn't lose either. Eventually, Coleman called a halt to the session, both fighters breathing heavily and sweating. "Martinez," Coleman said as they caught their breath, "you've got something that most recruits don't have. You can think under pressure and adapt to new situations. That's more valuable than being able to beat up other recruits." He paused, studying her intently. "But don't let this go to your head. The real test is still coming, and it's going to be harder than anything you've faced so far." The crucible was now only 3 weeks away, and Sarah could feel the anticipation building throughout the platoon. 5 more recruits had dropped out since her fight with Harrison, unable to handle the increasing pressure and demands of training. Those who remained were harder and more focused. But they were also more nervous about the final test that would determine whether they earned the title of Marine. Sarah spent her evenings studying the experiences of other recruits who had completed the crucible, trying to understand what she would face and how she could prepare. The stories were intimidating, describing physical and mental challenges that pushed people beyond their limits. But they also contained something else, accounts of ordinary people finding extraordinary strength when everything was on the line. Sarah began to believe that she might be ready for whatever the crucible would throw at her. The crucible began before dawn on a cold Monday morning, with 37 recruits standing in formation, knowing that not all of them would finish. Sarah felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as she looked around at her fellow recruits. These were the survivors, the ones who had made it through 11 weeks of the most intense training any of them had ever experienced. But the final test was designed to push them beyond anything they had faced before. Staff Sergeant Williams addressed the group with unusual solemnity. "Recruits, for the next 54 hours, you will be tested in ways that will reveal who you really are. Some of you will discover strength you didn't know you had. Others will discover that strength isn't enough. The Marine Corps title is not given. It must be earned through sacrifice, determination, and absolute refusal to quit when everything tells you to stop." The first challenge was a 12-mile hike carrying full combat gear across difficult terrain. Sarah had trained extensively for this, but the reality was more brutal than any preparation could have simulated. The weight of the gear, combined with the pace demanded by the instructors, pushed everyone to their physical limits within the first few miles. 2 recruits dropped out before the halfway point, unable to continue despite months of preparation. Sarah focused on her breathing and maintained a steady pace, using techniques she had learned for managing pain and fatigue. Around mile 8, she noticed that Thompson was struggling badly, falling behind the main group despite his previous strong performance in training. Without hesitation, Sarah moved beside him and began carrying part of his gear, even though it increased her own load significantly. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Thompson gasped, barely able to speak. "You don't need to help me. Save your own strength." "Marines don't leave Marines behind," Sarah replied, echoing something she had learned from studying Marine Corps history. "We finish this together or we don't finish at all." Her words seemed to give Thompson new energy, and together they managed to complete the hike within the required time limit. The next 40 hours brought a relentless series of challenges that tested every aspect of their training. Combat scenarios under extreme fatigue, problem-solving exercises with limited resources, and physical tasks that seemed impossible to complete. Sarah watched as more recruits reached their breaking point and made the decision to quit. Each dropout was a reminder that the title of Marine was not guaranteed, even for those who had come this far. The most difficult moment came during hour 36, when Sarah was assigned to lead a squad through a complex tactical exercise. Her team included Harrison, who had barely spoken to her since their fight, and 2 other recruits who had previously questioned her leadership abilities. The scenario required them to navigate through simulated enemy territory, rescue hostages, and complete their mission despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Harrison challenged her decisions from the beginning, questioning her tactical choices and suggesting alternative approaches that would have put the entire team at risk. Sarah realized that this was another test, Designed to see if she could maintain authority and make effective decisions while dealing with internal conflict and extreme stress. She calmly but firmly overruled Harrison's objections and directed the team according to her plan. The exercise was a success, with Sarah's team completing their objectives faster and more efficiently than any other squad that day. More importantly, her leadership under pressure had earned the respect of even her harshest critics. Harrison approached her afterward, his expression humble. "I was wrong about you from the beginning, Martinez. You're not just tough enough to be here, you're Marine Corps material through and through." As they entered the final hours of the crucible, Sarah felt a transformation taking place within herself. The girl who had walked onto those yellow footprints 11 weeks earlier was gone, replaced by someone harder, more confident, and absolutely certain of her capabilities. She had proven herself against every challenge the Marine Corps could devise, and she had done it while helping her fellow recruits succeed as well. The last test was individual combat against fresh Marines from the base, instructors who were rested and prepared while the recruits were exhausted and running on willpower alone. Sarah was matched against 5 different opponents in succession, each fight designed to test different aspects of her combat training. She was tired, hungry, and pushed beyond what she had thought were her limits, but she fought with the intensity of someone who refused to be denied. She won 3 of the 5 fights and performed respectably in the other 2, a result that exceeded the expectations of even her most supportive instructors. As she stood there afterward, breathing heavily and covered in sweat and dirt, Sarah realized that she had become exactly what she had dreamed of becoming when she first decided to join the Marines. She was no longer trying to prove she belonged there. She knew she belonged there. The moment Sarah had dreamed of for months finally arrived as she stood in formation with the 29 other recruits who had successfully completed the crucible. 8 more had dropped out during the final test, unable to maintain the physical and mental intensity required to earn the Marine Corps title. Those who remained looked different than they had 13 weeks earlier, transformed by the most demanding training program in the American military. Master Sergeant Coleman, who had tested Sarah so rigorously weeks earlier, stepped forward to address the new Marines. His voice carried the weight of tradition as he spoke words that had been spoken to thousands of Marines before them. "You came here as individuals from different backgrounds, different states, and different walks of life. Today you leave as United States Marines, bound together by the shared experience of having earned the most respected title in the American military." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Coleman continued. "Each of you has proven that you possess the courage, commitment, and character that defines a Marine. You have faced every challenge we could devise, overcome every obstacle we placed in your path, and demonstrated that you have what it takes to defend your country and protect your fellow Marines in combat." The ceremony was attended by family members who had traveled from across the country to witness this moment. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride and amazement at what their daughter had accomplished. Her father, who had worried about her decision to join the Marines, wiped tears from his eyes as he watched her receive her Eagle Globe and anchor pin, the symbol that marked her transformation from recruit to Marine. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came when Staff Sergeant Williams, the drill instructor who had questioned her presence on the very first day, approached her after the ceremony. His expression was serious, but there was unmistakable respect in his eyes. "Marine Martinez," he said, using her new title for the first time, "I owe you an apology. On day 1, I looked at you and saw someone who didn't belong here. I was wrong. You didn't just earn your place here. You exceeded every standard we set for you." The story of Sarah's success spread quickly through Marine Corps circles, becoming an inspiration for other women considering military service and a lesson for instructors about the danger of making assumptions based on appearance. But for Sarah herself, the graduation ceremony was not an ending, but a beginning. She had proven that she could survive Marine Corps training, but now she faced the challenge of proving herself in actual military service. Her first assignment was to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, where she would serve with the 2nd Marine Division in a combat support role. The Marines she served with had heard stories about the small recruit who had dropped multiple Marines during training, and she could feel their curiosity and skepticism as she reported for duty. Once again, she was the outsider trying to prove herself in a world dominated by people who questioned whether she belonged there. But Sarah was no longer the uncertain young woman who had walked onto those yellow footprints 13 weeks earlier. She had been forged by the Marine Corps training system into someone who thrived under pressure, excelled when challenged, and refused to accept limitations that others tried to place on her. When her new squad leader asked if she thought she could keep up with the unit's demanding training schedule, Sarah's response was immediate and confident. "Sir, I didn't come this far to back down from any challenge. Whatever this unit can throw at me, I'm ready for it." Her words carried the authority of someone who had already proven herself against impossible odds. Over the following months, she would continue to exceed expectations, earning the respect of her fellow Marines through performance rather than politics. Years later, when Sarah had risen through the ranks and was training new Marines herself, she would often think back to those early days when everyone told her she couldn't survive Marine Corps training. She had not only survived but had thrived, proving that determination and character mattered more than size or gender. The 5 Marines she had defeated during her crucible testing had become some of her closest friends and strongest supporters, bound together by the shared experience of being pushed beyond their limits and discovering what they were truly capable of achieving. Sarah's story became part of Marine Corps legend, told to new recruits as an example of what was possible when someone refused to accept other people's limitations. But for Sarah herself, the greatest victory was not the respect she had earned from others, but the knowledge that she had stayed true to her own vision of who she could become. Regardless of what anyone else believed about her potential,